I'm Ken Klippenstein with TYT Investigates. I'm going to be talking to you today about a pretty shocking story in CNN that found that President Trump failed to adequately um, respond to and take seriously the threat of domestic terrorism, specifically white supremacist terror, which unfortunately we've all seen poses an enormous threat, not just from the attack this weekend in El Paso, but a number of mass casualty incidents since his administration. And of course, before that, this didn't begin with President Trump. But what I thought was interesting about this story, and I linked to it in the video description if you guys want to see the original source, was they actually got high-level senior Department of Homeland Security officials on record saying that the White House did not take the threat of domestic terror seriously enough, and that's pretty incredible because when you get these senior guys, I work with national security sources quite a lot myself. It's very difficult to get senior guys to criticize the White House because they know that when they do that, all hell's going to break loose. And the White House might conduct a leak investigation. They might start messing with budgetary stuff to make their job more difficult. So for them to stick their necks out and speak to CNN on background, of course, because they don't want to get in too much trouble, I think it suggests that there's a serious problem here, which I imagine many of you suspect because we're seeing these constant mass shootings and attacks. We spend so much money on security, national security type stuff. You have to wonder where it's all going if they're not able to stop these things. But essentially, what this report in CNN found, citing these senior officials, was that in the kind of list of counterterror priorities that the Department of Homeland Security sets, they didn't put domestic terror threats. All they put for it was one paragraph worth. And so there's a really great quote in here where it says they just put one throwaway line about domestic terror, which I think sort of characterizes perfectly the White House and the Trump administration's approach to this. And it might not come as a surprise, but President Trump, instead of focusing on that, particularly the white supremacist threat, what he ended up focusing on instead was jihadi terror, which obviously is not nothing. I'm not saying that's not an issue, but when you focus on that to the exclusion of this other group, which frankly seems to be becoming emboldened and stronger. I mean, not just in the U.S. This is an international thing. We had the Christchurch massacre. We're having attacks all over the place. So, of course, he focused on Islam, jihadism, to the exclusion of these other groups, and that's kind of what we're seeing. It's interesting because we haven't seen. I don't feel like we see that many jihadi attacks in the U.S. Certainly not in the last couple of years. I don't know that I'd attribute that to Trump so much as that ISIS has been more or less defeated, at least for now. So one would think that we would shift, think, okay, well, now that we've dealt with this to some extent, maybe we can look at these other things. But that's not what we're seeing. And what's particularly interesting about this is that the FBI director just a couple weeks ago was reported. He said that the number one cause of these domestic terror attacks, if I'm looking at his quote right here, is um, is is that white supremacist violence, I think, is the major contributor of a lot of these attacks. And this is the FBI director. This is not some far left, activist person making this point. So, in the FBI director, Trump's FBI director, the person he picked to replace Comey after he, as you all know, fired him, is even saying this. And the administration doesn't seem to be doing anything about it. According to the story in CNN, these DHS officials said that they were begging the White House, fighting with them for the better part of the last 2 years to try to make this more of a priority, and they didn't. It's not clear exactly why they're resisting. One could speculate that Trump doesn't particularly care about that kind of stuff because, as I've said, and as he said repeatedly, he mirrors a lot of the language they use. If you look at the El Paso shooters' alleged manifesto, he says very explicitly that this attack is to try to deter immigrants from coming here and to try to push out immigrants so that we can maintain what he calls the white character of the United States. All of this is language quite similar to stuff that President Trump has said. Now, I understand you can't, lay at someone's feet blame for something if they said things in words and someone else takes an action, but the similarity between not just the rhetoric, but the ideology is striking. And I think it would be naive not to say that there is some kind of relation. Now, one thing I try to question liberals on is I don't, racism and extremism did not begin with Trump. I want to be clear about that. And I think it's counterproductive to suggest that if it wasn't for Trump, we wouldn't be dealing with any of this. But it's got to have an effect to have the most famous uh, politician in the country going on television repeatedly and saying they're coming, they are coming into the country to steal your jobs and rape children and all these crazy things. He said bring diseases and things. Now, people like you or I might just laugh at that and know that this is just um, him doing what he does, which is demagoguing, because he's not doing a whole lot else for folks. He hasn't done much about the healthcare crisis. He hasn't done much way of inequality and so on and so forth. So he's got to try to get him whipped up about other things. But not everyone's going to know that. And if you're saying that it's an invasion, and he's used terms like this repeatedly, he's not saying that oh we want to. He's not making some sort of technocratic thing like oh we need to come up with a better immigration plan. No, he's saying we're being attacked. I think it's natural that some folks who don't realize that he's just demagoguing are going to take that literally. And if you think you're being attacked, then you can probably justify a lot of horrible things that you might do in response. So yeah, this story sort of shows what I feel like a lot of us might suspect, but we have it from senior Department of Homeland Security officials, and for that reason, I wanted to bring it to your attention. And I hope that there is some kind of response to this, in the sense that people see that they're not prioritizing the threats posed by these white supremacist groups. And a lot of that depends on what the public response to these kind of stories is. And so it would be nice if we could just talk about these things because clearly leaving this to the experts, quote unquote, is not working for us. Because it sounds like the DHS officials tried to do things, but the White House just rebuffed them. That's actually in the title of the story. So let me go to. I'm going to pull up really